I recommend Yahuwah for all your needs. And if you in sin, he can certainly give you the strength to come out of sin. First, you got to start keeping the commandments. Sin is the transgression of the Torah. So you got to start keeping the commandments. So for that, I recommend Yahuwah. Good morning, good day, grand rising. All praises to the Most High Power. You are live and direct once again with your Akazaki Yahoo, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bahashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom Wa Baruchim. That is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day that the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Hallelujah. All right, we're back for another informative video, real quick and easy. I had a double header on this one for you. This particular video is brought to us by, let me get it on the screen, by our good brothers over, Slacky, that's the wrong video, by our good brothers over at Black Journals. It is the untold story of the Christmas rebellion in Jamaica. So our Jamaican brothers done went wild on the adversary over in that land there. And though Jamaica is a black land among black people, it's still a land of captivity. Because despite it being run and by black people, they still subject to all these heathen. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and get to the content. And here we go.
This started out on a Christmas day, the 25th. It was an outrage, provoked by the irrepressible want for the freedom of a people. Eventually, the situation spiraled out of control, from Christmas Day all the way down into the new year, as the colonial authorities would launch a series of counterattacks against its rebel slaves who refused to be defeated. Such display of mutual cruelty in the name of survival would forever be a historic defiance of the meanings built around the nostalgic day of Christmas. And isn't this additionally why a huge number of blacks all around the world loathe every celebration that comes from such a beautifully sensational season of cheer? Christmas? For it was all nothing but a repeatedly traumatizing season for their enslaved ancestors in those dark eras of slavery. Now sit back. This is going to get really interesting. The Christmas Rebellion, also known as the Baptist War, the Sam Sharp Rebellion, the Christmas Uprising, and the Great Jamaican Slave Revolt of 1831 to 1832, was an 11-day rebellion that started on the 25th December 1831 and involved up to 60,000 of the 300,000 slaves in the colony of Jamaica. Let us fill you in on the background for a quick second. The said rebellion was sparked by a number of factors, including, number one, a denial of an extra day's holiday at Christmas. Number 2, rumors that emancipation had been granted in Britain but was being withheld by the planters. Number 3, the economic depression that affected some impoverished whites, making them allies of the rebels. Number 4, inflammatory speeches and articles in the newspapers written by Jamaican planters. The rebellion was led by Samuel Sharp, a Baptist preacher, who called for the enslaved to stop working on Christmas Day. The rebellion began peacefully as a general strike, but soon turned violent. The rebellion spread rapidly to other plantations, including the Boyne Estate. The British forces and the Jamaican government overpowered the armed slaves by the first week of 1832. And now, consequences. The rebellion was militarily unsuccessful, but it played a major part in the abolition of slavery throughout the British Empire. Within 18 months, William IV gave his royal assent to the Slave Emancipation Act of 1833. Now that was the summary. Let us further into a little basics. As the warm Caribbean sun dipped into the horizon in December 1831, a sense of foreboding settled over the island of Jamaica. The white planters, who had grown wealthy and complacent on the backs of their enslaved laborers, slept fitfully in their grand estates, unaware of the storm that was brewing. For months, whispers of discontent had been circulating among the enslaved population, their voices hushed, but their determination growing with each passing day. The planters had tried to ignore the rumors, to dismiss them as mere fantasy, but deep down they knew that something was amiss. The enslaved individuals who had toiled for generations in the scorching sun, their bodies broken and their spirits worn, had finally reached a breaking point. They had decided to rise up, to speak for the freedom that had been denied to them for so long. The uprising of over 60,000 Jamaicans that changed the very nature of revolt is a story we are solemnly reminded of today, at such a sensational and nostalgic time of cheer and merry Christmas. Before we delve deeper into this pivotal moment in history, we would like to take a moment to express our gratitude for your presence here. If you find this content informative and engaging, we kindly request your support. Please consider liking this video, sharing it with your network, and subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue producing documentaries that shed light on overlooked narratives, giving voice to the untold stories that shape our understanding of the world. Now let's get down to the full digest.
Eyes down! Eyes down.
It was the year 1831, and the enslaved people of Jamaica had had enough. Led by the fearless Samuel Sharp, a Baptist preacher and visionary leader, they embarked on a daring quest for freedom and equality. Born in 1801 in Montego Bay, Samuel Sharp grew up as a house slave. Unlike many slaves, he was literate, having been educated by his master, who was also named Samuel Sharp. His master treated him very well and allowed him certain privileges. He would thus become his master's right-hand man, and in no time would be baptized, subsequently becoming a lay deacon and leader of the congregation at the Birch Hill Baptist Church. As a house slave, Samuel Sharp also had special responsibilities, one of which was to take the jobbing slaves, those hired out to others, to work. While carrying out his daily duties, he became disgruntled with the way in which slaves were treated, he himself included. He wanted to be free. And because the British allowed slaves to hold religious meetings, Sharp, during his evangelism, started preaching about freedom from slavery. Samuel Sharp had been permitted to travel between plantations for the ostensible reason of teaching Bible lessons and leading small worship services. This he did, but he also used the opportunity to appoint cell leaders who appointed their own small groups. During this period, Sharp created a ritual called Taking the Swear, in which new recruits would promise on the Bible to sit down after Christmas and not work until their demands were met. Sharp did the first secret swearings, but from then on, his own case officers did the work of exponential recruitment. In this way, and within one of the most repressive societies on earth, he built a connected network of strangers that stretched 70 miles in all directions. Sharp's development of safe houses was also ahead of its time. Every Jamaican plantation had a section in the white ruling class called the Negro Village, a main street of individual houses occupied by enslaved people. Field hands typically occupied small huts, but those in senior labor roles tended to have frame houses. In these elite houses, Sharp preached about the business, which was later called the Christmas Rebellion. With the information he had gathered over the years, his firm belief was that the only way to achieve freedom was through armed resistance. And with that, his top-level recruits used most of the elite houses for the most sensitive meetings, stockpiled weapons in them, and even created their own military-style uniforms, blue jackets with red sashes. Going forward, to understand the dynamics at play during this uprising, it is vital to understand the social structure of the 19th century colonial Jamaica. Jamaica, like much of the West Indies, was what was known as a plantocracy. In this arrangement, a minority of white European settlers, human traffickers, and plantation owners dominated the majority of enslaved Africans on the island. Conscious of their significant numerical disadvantage, with Africans vastly outnumbering whites with a ratio of about 12-1, planters deployed ferocious violence to discipline their slaves at home and used their substantial wealth and influence to lobby against abolitionists in parliament and the press, determined to protect their interests and maintain the status quo. But despite their efforts, the sun was setting on slavery in the British Empire, and hopes of emancipation around the corner emboldened the enslaved population to take matters into their own hands. By 1831, the British Parliament began discussing the abolition of slavery throughout the empire, and this displeased many Jamaican planters. Sharp, on his part, was a keen follower of the abolition debates happening in Parliament. To stay informed, he would read both local and foreign newspapers, ensuring he was up to date on the latest developments. But Sharp didn't stop there. He also made sure to share this information with his congregation, keeping them informed about the progress of the abolition movement. This way, Sharp was not only educating himself, but also spreading awareness and mobilizing his community about the issue of abolition. Thomas Burchill, a missionary in Montego Bay, returned from England following Christmas vacation. Many of the Baptist ministry expected that he would return with papers for emancipation from the king, William IV. They also thought that the king's men would enforce the order. However, discontent would escalate among the slaves when the Jamaican governor announced that no emancipation had been granted. In that month of December that same year, 1831, under the mistaken belief that freedom had already been granted to the enslaved in Jamaica by the British Parliament, and that local planters refused to abide by the decision, Sharp organized a protest. The rebellion was strategically timed to coincide with the peak sugarcane harvest season in Jamaica. Sharp knew that disrupting the harvest would have a devastating impact on the plantation owners and the colonial economy. Sharp's plan was simple: organizing a peaceful general strike where enslaved individuals would collectively refuse to work unless their demands for better working conditions, more freedom, and a working wage were met. This strike was strategically planned to begin on the day of Christmas in 1831, a time when the enslaved community would normally be given a brief respite from their labor. It was intended to be a non-violent form of protest, with enslaved individuals simply refusing to work until their demands were met. Sharp and his followers believed that by withholding their labor, they could pressure the plantation owners and managers to negotiate and grant them better working conditions and more freedom. Their refusal to work would prevent the sugar cane from being cut, resulting in the loss of the crop. This would simultaneously exert significant economic pressure on the plantation owners and colonial authorities, forcing them to consider the rebels' demands for better working conditions, more freedom, and ultimately, emancipation. Enlisted to be his military commanders were fellow literate enslaved Africans, spanning several different estates, illustrating the effectiveness of the vast communication network known colloquially as the slave grapevine. As the Christmas of the said year of event fell on a Sunday, which apparently was to be a traditional day of rest, Samuel Sharp had assumed that the enslaved workers would be entitled to the following Monday, which was Boxing Day, and Tuesday off as well. Seizing this opportunity, Sharp decided that the protest was to begin on that Sunday, December the 25th, 1831. The rebellion had begun in the parish of St. James, with a group of enslaved individuals, led by Samuel Sharp himself. As news of the uprising spread all through the whole of Jamaica, an estimated number of 60,000 slaves, from the total slave population of 300,000, took part in the rebel assaults on plantation property, taking over large rural parts of St. James Parish. The initial peaceful demonstration soon became a violent uprising, and out of a population of 600,000, an estimated 60,000 took up arms to resist their oppression. Any pretense of a peaceful demonstration was lost when Kensington Estate was set ablaze by enslaved rebels. with the rebellion taking place in earnest soon after. While initially some plantation owners fought back, they were no match for the tactics of Sam Sharp and his military commanders. As the day wore on into the next, the embers of rebellion continued to glow, and by the next morning, the strike soon spread to other parishes including St. James, Trelawney, and Westmoreland, and to some sections of St. Elizabeth Parish. By this time, the rebellion was now a raging inferno, fueled by the deep-seated desire for freedom that had been burning within the enslaved individuals for generations. With a fierce determination, they began to target the symbols of their oppression, burning plantations to the ground, destroying crops, and attacking their enslavers. The once peaceful countryside was now a battleground, with the sound of drums, conch shells, and gunfire echoing through the hills and valleys. The colonial authorities, caught off guard by the rapid spread of the rebellion, scrambled to respond. Governor Sir William Lindsay, determined to maintain order and protect the interests of the plantation owners, deployed troops to quell the rebellion. The militia, composed of British soldiers and local volunteers, was tasked with restoring order and crushing the rebellion. But the enslaved individuals, fueled by their desire for freedom, were not easily intimidated. They continued to fight back, using guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the terrain to launch surprise attacks on the colonial forces. The stage was set for a brutal and bloody conflict, one that would leave a lasting impact on the island of Jamaica. As the colonial authorities struggled to contain the rebellion, they found themselves facing a determined and resourceful foe. The rebels, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought bravely, using their intimate knowledge of the island's terrain to launch surprise attacks on the colonial forces. But the authorities were determined to crush the rebellion, and they responded with brutal force, killing hundreds of enslaved individuals and burning their homes to the ground. The violence and destruction only seemed to intensify as the days passed, and by December 27, 1831, Jamaica was an island in chaos. The rebellion, now in its third day, continued to spread its tentacles across the island, leaving a trail of destruction and violence in its wake. Reports poured in from all corners of the island, telling of plantations ablaze, crops destroyed, and enslavers attacked. The once peaceful countryside was now a war zone, with the sound of gunfire, screams, and wailings filling the air. As the colonial authorities struggled to contain the rebellion, they turned their attention to capturing its leaders. Samuel Sharp, the charismatic Baptist preacher who had sparked the rebellion, was among the first to be arrested. The authorities, hoping to decapitate the rebellion by capturing its leader, threw Sharp into prison, charging him with inciting the uprising. Despite the arrest of Sharp and other suspected leaders, the rebellion showed no signs of slowing down. In fact, it seemed to gain momentum, as if the very act of arresting its leaders had galvanized the enslaved individuals to fight even harder for their freedom. The colonial authorities, realizing that they had underestimated the depth of feeling among the enslaved population, began to worry that they might be facing a full-blown revolution. As the situation spiraled out of control, the colonial authorities would launch a series of counterattacks against the rebels on the 28th of that same month of December, with more troops and militia being deployed to quell the uprising. It was a sorry sight, the sounds of gunfire and cannons echoing through the hills and valleys. The authorities, confident in their superior firepower and training, expected to quickly crush the rebellion and restore order to the island. But the rebels were not easily intimidated. Well organized and determined, they continued to fight back against their oppressors. As the last days of 1831 ticked away, the rebellion in Jamaica reached a fever pitch. By the 29th of December, Jamaica was already a landscape of smoldering plantations and charred ruins, the aftermath of the rebels' daring raids on colonial strongholds. But despite their initial successes, the rebels soon found themselves faced with a formidable foe. The colonial forces at this time had been reinforced by fresh troops, determined to crush the uprising once and for all. The battle on December the 29th was nothing short of intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The rebels, however, refused to back down, driven by their desire for freedom and their determination to resist the brutal system of slavery that had held them captive for so long. As the day wore on, the colonial forces began to gain the upper hand as they pushed the rebels back and regained control of key strongholds. But the rebels were far from defeated. The day wore on. It was now the 30th day of December. The rebels proved to be full of plans, resilience, and readiness. They had launched a series of surprise attacks on colonial forces, catching them off guard and inflicting significant casualties. The fighting was the fiercest, and the mutual surroundings now rife and boiling with stupendous destruction. Such display of mutual cruelty in the name of survival was a historic defiance of the meanings built around the nostalgic day of Christmas, with rebels and colonial forces clashing in a maelstrom of gunfire, screams, and wailing. Despite their bravery, however, the rebels were ultimately outnumbered and outgunned, and they were forced to retreat and regroup. By December the 31st, the British authorities were forced to implement martial law on the island amid the chaos, and had no choice but to ask for assistance from the Maroons, an independent community made up of runaway slaves and very skilled fighters. The intervention of the Maroons proved decisive in crushing the rebellion and capturing Sam Sharp's deputies in command and a number of other leaders, including Campbell and Dehaney. Hundreds of rebels had been killed during the fighting, compared with only a handful of whites. Many more rebels were captured and killed after the fighting had ceased, while the property damage inflicted upon slave owner properties was immense. At this time, the rebels knew that their time was running out. The colonial forces had regained control of the island, and the rebels were exhausted, battered, and bruised. But even in defeat, the rebels refused to surrender. They vowed to continue their fight for freedom, even if it meant going underground and waging a guerrilla war against their oppressors. And so, as the old year gave way to the new, the rebels slipped away into the shadows, their spirits unbroken, and their determination to fight for freedom burning brighter than ever. On January 2nd, 1832, the colonial authorities launched a major assault on the rebel stronghold of Kensington Estate, which was located just outside of Montego Bay. The rebels, led by men like Thomas Dove and William Turner, put up a fierce resistance, but they were ultimately outnumbered and outgunned. Many rebels were killed or captured, and the colonial authorities claimed a major victory. But the rebels still didn't give up. On January the 3rd, 1832, a group of rebels launched a surprise attack on the colonial forces in the town of Falmouth. The attack was led by a rebel named James Harris, who had managed to evade capture despite being one of the most wanted men in Jamaica. The rebels inflicted significant casualties on the colonial forces, but they were ultimately forced to retreat. As the rebellion entered its final days, the colonial authorities began to round up suspected rebels and bring them to trial. The trials were often brutal and unfair, with many of the accused being sentenced to death or transportation. The Christmas Rebellion, which lasted for approximately 11 days, resulted in significant loss of life. Over 200 enslaved individuals and 14 white overseers or planters lost their lives during the uprising. In the aftermath, the colonial authorities launched a brutal crackdown on suspected participants. With over 500 enslaved individuals being convicted and punished, and many others being hanged. As a warning to others, the severed heads of the executed were displayed around their plantations. Those who escaped execution were subjected to harsh treatment, suffering physical abuse and brutal punishment. Sharp was named the key figure of the rebellion. In a remarkable display of selflessness, Sharp surrendered to the colonial authorities in an effort to protect the Baptist missionaries who had been wrongly blamed for inciting the rebellion. Despite his bravery, Sharp was eventually tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. On May the 23rd, 1832, he was led to the gallows in Montego Bay, where he was hanged for his role in the rebellion. Sharp was buried like a criminal in the sands of Montego Bay Harbor, but his remains were later recovered and buried beneath the pulpit at the Birchell Baptist Church. The rebellion's impact was felt far beyond Jamaica's shores. It, along with other rebellions, including the Haitian Revolution, made European enslavers realize that controlling large slave populations was unsustainable. This realization contributed massively to Britain's decision to abolish slavery in 1833, just 2 years after the Christmas Rebellion. However, The road to full emancipation was long and arduous. The act stipulated that formerly enslaved individuals would have to undergo a period of apprenticeship under their former masters before being granted full freedom. It wasn't until 1838 that unconditional emancipation was granted. In closing, the legacy of the Christmas Rebellion extends beyond its impact on the abolition of slavery. It also highlights the bravery and determination of enslaved individuals who fought for their freedom. Samuel Sharp's leadership and the rebels' willingness to challenge the status quo paved the way for future generations to continue the fight for equality and justice. Within 18 months of the rebellion, William IV gave his reluctant royal assent to the Slave Emancipation Act of 1833. Samuel Sharp, however, did not live to see the fruits of his labor. He was hanged on May the 23rd, 1832, before the act was passed. Nevertheless, the revolutionary methods of the business had ultimately triumphed against the most powerful government in the world, leading to the emancipation of over 800,000 people. That brings us to the end of yet another heartwarming video. Thank you for joining us on this journey.
All right, so informing you of the rebellion that happened in Jamaica during the time of 1225. So our next video, we're going to jump over to aggressive intelligence, and we're going to learn a little bit about the real Uncle Tom. Was he good or was he bad? Let's see what he says.
What if I told you that one of the most controversial characters in American literature was based on a real person, a man who was anything but submissive? Today, we're uncovering the true story of Josiah Henson, the inspiration behind Uncle Tom's Cabin. From slave to freedom fighter, preacher to community leader, Henson's life was one of courage, resilience, and relentless pursuit of justice. This is the tale of the real Uncle Tom. Welcome back to Aggressive Intelligence, where we dive deep into the untold stories that shaped our world. Today, we're exploring a figure whose legacy has been both celebrated and misunderstood. Josiah Henson was born a slave on June 15, 1789, in Charles County, Maryland. All his life, he witnessed the harsh realities of the slave system. One haunting incident that shaped his life was when young Josiah witnessed his father being brutally punished for defending his mother against assault by a white overseer. The punishment he received was very harsh: 100 lashes, an ear cut off, and sold to a plantation in Alabama. Josiah never saw his father again. A year after his father was sold, his master died in an accident. In a drunken stupor, he fell from his horse into a shallow creek and was too drunk to save himself. It became necessary to sell the estate and the slaves. Josiah's entire family was put on the auction block and sold to the highest bidder, to different plantations. His mother pleaded and pleaded with the man who purchased him to buy her as well. Her voice fell on deaf ears. Henson was a child when he became separated from his mother and was sold to a child trafficker. He fell deathly ill and was offered to his mother's owner, Isaac Riley, an inveterate gambler and drinker. The deal was simple: free if the boy died, or in exchange for some horseshoeing work if he survived. Against all odds, Henson recovered. Life on Riley's plantation, a mere 12 miles from Washington, D.C., was harsh. Henson suffered countless beatings, particularly after he tried to learn how to read, an illegal act for a slave. Yet even amidst these hardships, Henson's physical strength and natural leadership qualities soon became apparent. As Henson grew to a young man, his abilities did not go without notice. He became Riley's market man in the nation's capital, responsible for selling all the farm's produce. This brought him into contact with lawyers and businessmen from whom he could develop business acumen that served him well in later years. But Henson's talents did not stop in business. He became a talented preacher, even though he could not read. His natural eloquence and sense of humor helped to win the hearts of the parishioners, and he would memorize verses to make powerful sermons. At the tender age of 18, Henson began overseeing the field hands, which meant he replaced a white overseer. On his leadership, the slaves worked even harder with greater and more abundant crops than any time in history. This role, giving him power over others, did put him in a difficult position of presiding over fellow slaves. Josiah's master used to go out and drink and gamble a lot. He used to take Josiah with him, just to make sure that he made it back correctly. On one particular day, there was a big commotion, and Josiah heard a lot of noise going on. So he broke his way through the crowd to find out what was happening. Well, he saw his master in a brawl and tried to help him out. He hit a white overseer who became very upset. The overseer saw Josiah several days later and had some slaves with him, and made the slaves hold Josiah down. The white overseer beat Josiah with a rail of a fence, and beat him to the point where he broke both of his shoulders. Josiah never healed from that because he was not allowed to go to the doctor or to receive medicine. So for the rest of his life, he was not able to lift his arms over his head. When Josiah's master found out what happened, he was very upset that his property had been damaged, so he took the white overseer to court. Well, back in those days, slaves were not allowed to speak in court. They were not allowed to give a testimony, so the white overseer basically went free. The year 1825. Josiah's master was ordered by the court to sell all his property at auction to satisfy his debts. The master's property included Josiah, Charlotte, and their 4 sons and all the other slaves. The master concocted a plan to hide the slaves from his creditors by having Josiah take them to his brother's plantation in Kentucky. Josiah took the charge of supervising this journey. While on his route to Kentucky, he passes through Cincinnati. Ohio was a free state, and by them being in Cincinnati, the free blacks there tried to convince Josiah Henson to let the slaves go and to find jobs and to be free. Though he had many opportunities to escape during the trip, Henson, true to his character, safely delivered all the slaves to Kentucky. Later on, those slaves were taken into the Deep South, where he learned later on that those conditions were so brutal that he later regretted that he missed the opportunity to set those people free. As well as himself, Josiah was haunted by regret over that day in Cincinnati, when he denied his friends their chance at liberty. It was while he was in Kentucky that Henson's determination to become free intensified. He devised a plan with the help of a white minister through which he could secretly raise funds to buy his freedom. He encouraged Henson to purchase a good suit of clothes and to get some transportation by way of a horse, and use this trip to speak and try and raise money for his freedom. Churches invited Henson to preach and raise contributions. He earned $350 toward his emancipation. That was the price that his master told him it would cost him to purchase his freedom, but Henson's faith in his master would be misplaced. Henson signs his X on the manumission papers and makes his way back to Kentucky to get his wife and kids and head out on a new life of freedom. But when he arrived at the plantation in Kentucky, the manumission papers stated that you're $650 short of the freedom. His owner had taken advantage of the fact that Henson couldn't read or write, and that was really the beginning of Henson realizing that his owner was not an honorable man. Josiah's master in Maryland and his brother in Kentucky began to argue about who owned Josiah. The only way to resolve the argument was to sell Josiah and divide the proceeds between the brothers. When Josiah was told that he was to go with the master's son to New Orleans to sell some produce, Josiah knew in his heart that the real reason he was being taken to New Orleans was to be sold. In a strange turn, while on their way to New Orleans, Riley's nephew, whom he charged with selling Henson, contracted malaria. He begged Josiah to take him home. Josiah, with his characteristic tenderness, nursed the young man back to health and traveled north with him back to Kentucky. In 1830, at the age of 41, he decided to make the momentous choice to escape. Josiah set off north with his wife and children. The family journeyed over 600 miles through treacherous country on foot, dodging slave catchers along the way. By day, the runaways hid in the woods and tried to sleep. At night, they walked by the light of the stars. After weeks of walking, worn out and about to break down, the family reached Lake Erie. There they met a friendly captain on a Scottish ship who promised to take them into Canada. As they sailed as far as where he could see the Canadian shore, he pointed into the trees and said, "You see those trees? They grow on free soil. As soon as your feet touch that, you're a free man. Be a good fellow, won't you?" "Yes, sir," Josiah promised. "I'll use my freedom well." Henson did not sit idle over his newfound freedom when he arrived in Canada. He became a leader in the community of escaped slaves, helping others find their footing on new land. In 1841, Henson founded the Dawn Settlement near Dresden, Ontario. The community was designed to be a haven for escaped slaves, providing education and vocational training. The settlement included a school, a sawmill, and a grist mill, providing education and employment opportunities for former slaves. At the core of the Dawn Settlement sat a school called the British American Institute, which was meant to give children and adults alike a classical education. He had envisioned a self-sufficient community where former slaves could acquire their skills, work, and live freely. Henson's work didn't stop in the Dawn Settlement. He became a key figure in what was called the Underground Railroad, and this was an underground network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved African Americans to escape to the so-called Free States or Canada. At a great personal risk, Henson crossed back into the United States time after time to help other slaves exert their own way out to freedom. It is estimated that he helped more than 118 people flee for freedom. Of missions dangerous in nature, Henson showed great bravery and uncompromising commitment to the cause of freedom. His personal experiences with slavery and the escape routes provided first-hand information that was invaluable to the abolitionist movement. In the year 1849, he published an autobiography entitled Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave, now an inhabitant of Canada, as narrated by himself. This work defined vividly and in first person the realities of slavery and the journey to freedom, catching attention of many, among them notably a lady named Harriet Beecher Stowe. This story of Henson inspired the abolitionist writer. She used part of his life to influence her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852. The book turned out to be a sensational one, selling 300,000 copies in the first year and playing a vital role in galvanizing anti-slavery sentiment in the North. Uncle Tom's Cabin took its impact on American society and politics to great depths. The book ushered all the horrors of slavery right into the Northern readers' houses, most of whom had no idea about its real brutality. Its emotional power turned public opinion against slavery, usually credited with having been able to precipitate the Civil War. It brought the realities of slavery into the living rooms of Americans in the North, many of whom had been unaware of the extent of its cruelty. It is said that upon meeting Stowe in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln remarked, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." Although the validity of the quote is disputed, it does represent a belief held by many that this novel did indeed play a major role in leading up to the war. The phenomenal success of Uncle Tom's Cabin launched Henson into the public eye. He would now be referred to as the real Uncle Tom, a description he initially embraced. Henson saw the novel as a valuable weapon in the fight against slavery and said, "If my humble words in any way inspired that gifted lady to write, I have not lived in vain." But the legacy of Uncle Tom would become complicated. Though Stowe's novel was meant to be a severe critique against slavery, the character of Uncle Tom would often be distorted. Tom shows frequently portrayed him as overly obsequious and fawning to his white masters, a far cry from both Stowe's original character and Henson himself. The term Uncle Tom eventually became an insult, used to accuse someone of being traitorous to their racial identity by being subservient to whites in authority. This perversion of the term painfully contrasts with the real Josiah Henson, a man who had to risk everything to gain freedom and afterwards dedicate his life to releasing others from slavery. Despite the controversies of Uncle Tom's Cabin, Josiah Henson never turned his back on his work for racial equality and education. Henson visited England several times, where he was received by Queen Victoria in 1877. During such visits, he was raising funds for the Dawn Settlement and furthering his efforts to enlighten people about the actuality of slavery. Henson died May 5, 1883, at the age of 93 in Dresden, Ontario. His funeral was one of the largest in the town's memory, with both black and white mourners turning out to pay homage to this extraordinary man. Today, Henson's legacy lives on. His former home in Dresden is now the Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site, preserving the story of Henson and the Dawn Settlement. In 1983, Henson became the first black person to be featured on a Canadian postage stamp, a testament to his importance in Canadian history. The story of Josiah Henson reminds us of the importance of understanding the real histories behind our cultural narratives. The real Uncle Tom was not some meek and submissive figure at all, but one informed by principle, courage, and action. While securing his own freedom, He dedicated his life to helping others achieve theirs. If you found this video enlightening, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to Aggressive Intelligence.
All right. So sorry to the brother for all of his situation. The reason, dear brother, may you rest in power, that people use that as a negative is because you took a group of slaves to a free state to cross them over to get to Kentucky, where you were decimated and sold. You had the opportunity to be free and you didn't take it. So that's the negative to your story there. Now, I know you had well intention, but our well intention has to be for our own people. We can't be well intentioned for other people above our own. That's not sensible. If I got a chance to free or help my people and I choose not to do so for the sake of somebody else, of another people, what have I just done? I've sold my people out. That's a sellout move. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure the brother was a good brother, truthfully. However, that act is an indication as to why Uncle Tom is a negative term. And it will continue to be a negative term. Because Uncle Tom took a group of slaves into Ohio where they were free and could have went and got freedom. Instead, he took them into Kentucky, one of the worst places in the country at that time for slaves. That's sad. I apologize that happened. I know that wasn't your intention. I honestly do, but um, man, that's a horrible situation. Nevertheless, um, again, the brother, I'm sure his intentions were well. He just he didn't understand Torah. You know, Torah says that if a slave escape his master and come into your land, you can't take him back. Did y'all know that? Did you know that Torah explicitly states that if a slave escapes his masters and come into your land, you have to take him, house him, protect him. You cannot give him over to that master. Now, is that talking about uh, my aunt got a captive and his captive escaped and come to my house and now I'm supposed to protect him from my aunt? No. La. No. That's not what that's talking about. What that's talking about is one of your people who've been sold to somebody for whatever reason manages to escape and comes home and he don't have anything at home. He comes to you for help. And instead of you trying to deal rightly with him, you trying to sell him back and hand him over. That's against Torah. That is completely against Torah. And that's what Torah was teaching us. Does that mean that uh, somebody from Simeon got a Moabite as a captive, and he owns him, and the Moabite runs off and comes to your house and bang on the door. You open the door and it's a Moabite, and he said, "I escaped my master. Please hide me." Like, don't you belong to Obadiah? Yes, yes, I escaped Obadiah. Can you hide me, please? La. Matter of fact, let's go back over. Let's go see Obadiah, because that's not how that Torah works for that particular situation. All right? Interesting. We're going to learn some stuff. All praises to the Abba. I'm going to find that script and put it on the screen here so we can go over it. We'll do that on the next video. I'm planning on running some videos through the day here. So continue to come back and look for more interesting information from your Akazaki Yahoo. Y'all already know, if you've been rocking with me for any amount of time, y'all know it's all about the Most High. First, the Most High, Ba'Hashem, Yahushua, Yahushua, Hamashiach, the Messiah, and then it's Israel, Yasha'al, Yasha'Allah. And the reason we do this is because, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abba, to the Father, for Israel is that they may be saved. I want to see my people saved. I want to see my people set free from this bondage, from these harsh conditions, from the scattering of all over the world. I want to see my people know what it's like to be in your own land and have your own government over you, and no heathen over you. In fact, heathen are under you instead of over you. I want all my people to experience that reality. Every single one of us. So I don't want any of my people to perish. That's why I'm so against this so-called Christmas crap. Because Christmas is a celebration of an idol or multiple idols. And so-called black people who are truly the children of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, have no place with idols. None. We should not be dealing with idols on any level, because that displeases our power. I call him Yahuwah, you may call him Yahweh, you may call him Yahweh. It doesn't matter how you pronounce it. It's the Yod, the Hey, the Wah, the Hey. However you pronounce it doesn't matter. We understand that we're talking about the power of Israel, Yasha'al, Yasha'Allah. However you pronounce it, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is that Ecclesiastes, chapter number 12 and verse number 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important that we understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged on whether we have feared the Most High and kept his commandments. Why? Because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahoo, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah, Ba'Hashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel, who are scattered to the four corners of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day that the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land, with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family. I got more videos coming. Join me back. Peace and blessings, Yisrael. All praises to the Abba. Barak Hashem, Yahuwah.